afternoon, everyone from a New York City that is still under partial lockdown, but slowly re-emerging to its new life, whatever that may be. Thank you for watching. After almost 3 months, week after week, we have arrived at our final episode of the spring season of the Leon FERARU Conference Series, one of our permanent programs that tackles relevant topics on both sides of the Atlantic and highlights relevant expertise in the United States and Romania. We are very proud to end an extraordinary lineup of historians, writers, medical doctors, political scientists, economists, filmmakers, with one of the most influential contemporary names in anthropology, a true seminal author, and one of the great experts on Romania in the Western world, Professor KATHERINE VERDERY. Professor Verdery, thank you for sharing this afternoon with us.
Delighted to have the chance. Thank you for inviting me.
We are very happy to have you. KATHERINE Verdery is Julian Studley Faculty Scholar and Distinguished Professor of Anthropology of the City University of New York. She is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She was Eric Wolf Professor of Anthropology and the Director of the Center for Russian and European Studies at the University of Michigan. She also taught at the University of Minnesota and Johns Hopkins University. She has written extensively on various topics, of course, focusing on Eastern Europe and Romania. Some of the main titles: National Ideology under Socialism, Identity and Cultural Politics in Ceaușescu's Romania, What Was Socialism and What Comes Next, the famous title, The Political Lives of Dead Bodies, Reburial and Post-Socialist Change, The Vanishing Hector, together with Professor Gail Kligman, another important name in anthropology and a great expert on Romania, Secrets and Truths, Ethnography in the Archive of Romania's Secret Police, and the blockbuster, the bestseller, My Life as a Spy, Investigations in a Secret Police File. Amazing array of titles. We will have the chance to talk about many things that are in these books. You spent a lot of time in Romania. This is a country that you have come to know so well. Starting from 1973, just to paraphrase a famous line from the movies, what was a nice girl like you doing in a place like that in 1973?
Well, it's obvious I was spying, right? I was doing my doctoral research at Stanford, and I had to go someplace to do a dissertation. And I had a wonderful professor who used to say, it doesn't really matter where you go. Just find something about it that you like. If you like to sail, then go to the islands of the Pacific. You know, if you like snow, go to Alaska. And so I found that very reassuring, because then I didn't have to spend hours agonizing over what I was going to do. And one time I was looking at the map of Eastern Europe, and I saw all these place names in Romania, and I said, oh, I love this. So, and I'd had the idea of going to one of the East European countries, but I wasn't quite sure how I could arrange it until I happened by chance to meet Professor Mihail Chernea, who was in at Stanford, at the Stanford think tank, as we call it, when I was getting ready to go to the field. So I talked with him a few times, and he seemed to think that it would be possible for me to go to Romania. I have no idea what he really thought. But after that conversation, I said, well, I think I'll go there. It's interesting to me to think about how communism works in the modern world, and as opposed to all of the American stereotypes. So I decided to go there, but you can see that the rationale for it wasn't exactly a scholarly serious one. I was not all that old at the time, and I was trying to figure out where it might be fun to go. In a department that had a lot of students who went to the South Seas or Latin America, Southern America, where there were tribes that were still running around in loincloths. So I had to come up with a pretty good competitor in that crowd.
But yeah, I think you have picked up quite, your choice was far good, but definitely you are lucky that somebody like you made this choice. But and there have been almost 50 years of going back and forth, of fantastic research, of knowing the country inside out. How do you see this evolution of the country? Because I have seldom met anybody in the Western world with such an expertise, such a breadth of knowledge, but at the same time, somebody that has witnessed the evolution of Romania for, let's say, 50 years. How do you see this progress, which wasn't very linear, was complicated, was a difficult time, and then was a resurrection. You had everything.
Yes, I should start by saying that anthropologists are tend to be not as good on these kinds of questions, because we go to a village and we stay there for up to a year, but we don't necessarily read everyday newspapers, and we don't travel around from city to city. So what we end up knowing is something about a way of life from the place that we chose to go to in Romania. And therefore, I'm very humble about saying, how things have changed since I was there and so on. I do think that a couple of things that have been constant in these years, I'm sorry to say, is something that the United States now shares with you, and that is a very considerable level of political corruption. But in our country now, it's absolutely so awful that I can't begin to say, well, we've always been better than you. It's definitely not the case. But these ways of getting things, you call it corruption, these ways of getting things done that involve close relationships between people rather than buying somebody's time or something like that. So the immediate sense of human-to-human contact has been a very great constant for me, and sometimes it also shows up in Romanian politics in unpleasant ways, but during the communist period, you didn't tend to hear as much about that. So it's been more evident now. Another thing that I think is somewhat different after 1989, aside from people seeming to me to have a greater sense of sort of looseness, of freedom in that sense, and particularly the freeing up of people's sense of, let me say, enterprise, but lots and lots of interesting things being done, and people starting off with, you know, $3 and ending up with some gigantic firm. And I've been really impressed by that quality of Romania that I've seen. So in that respect, people were always enterprising, in the sense that, you know, I was taken through the back door by a friend of mine in Cluj, who helped me get some fresh cucumbers from the back of the alimentara, things of that kind. So the objects of creativity and so on may have changed, but I've always liked this quality of Romanians, and now it seems to me it has had much more room to flourish.
What do you think about the education? Because, you know, of course, you were, during these years, you have been associated with various universities. You are widely celebrated in the Romanian academic circle. You are Doctor Honoris Causa of several Romanian universities, all of them, I think.
Just two.
But definitely one of the most important names, I think, for the Romanian academia, and of course associated with many universities or research groups. What do you think about this evolution of the education, or you know, professorship, scholarship? How do you feel about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I was very impressed with when things first changed, and so you had a rector being thrown out of their jobs, or you know, new ones coming in any case, and a complete chaos and trying to put together a new curriculum for some of the fields. Obviously, Romanian literature is going to keep being Romanian literature, but how are you going to teach about East-West relations and things of this kind? I happened to have been fairly good friends with two people who ended up as ministers of education. And that was Andrei Marga and Liviu, now I really can't remember his name, the gentleman whose son was ambassador, whose son is head of the SRE now, Liviu Maior. Terribly embarrassing not to remember that.
Oh, this is our ambassador to the United States.
Yes, but he was fairly early in the game. He spent a year or two, as did Marga, as Minister of Education. And so I would get together with them periodically when I came, and they would tell me what sorts of triumphs they thought they'd had and what sorts of challenges they were still facing. And from them I got a very nuanced picture of what it means to try to overthrow an entire organization of learning that has been developed and put in place to achieve a single kind of result. And now that's being, well, in some cases, literally thrown out the window, although there were plenty of teachers who had difficulty adopting a new curriculum because they've been teaching something for, 25, 30 years. But hearing more about what it meant from the point of view of people who were active in trying to do this was tremendously enlightening for me. I also got to know a number of Romanian students because all of a sudden lots of Romanians were applying to graduate school in the United States. And I was teaching, I've been teaching at various points. I have to correct you. I was not at the University of Minnesota, but the University of Michigan. And since they paid my salary, I should acknowledge that. But Michigan had a...
I said about Michigan, but also it's in your bio that you had probably maybe you spent some time in, but you should know better.
That's all right. I have to just make sure.
I mentioned Michigan.
Right.
Of course.
So what were we saying? So yes, I had applications from a lot of Romanian students, people who wanted to come to work at especially at Michigan, because it had a very good East European program, which was not true at Johns Hopkins which was where I was when the revolution first happened. So we took some Romanian students, and they were fantastic, just amazingly good. Really made an impression among their fellow students. I'm thinking particularly of among the ones who went to Michigan were Oana Mateescu and Puiu Lațea, who Oana has now finished her dissertation, but the two of them were just so smart in classes, and students would, other American kinds of students would come to me and say, wow, where did these people get trained? Because somehow they thought that, you know, communist education wasn't any good. So that was another important change that I noticed. And people's expressions changed. People got a little looser. Some of them were still worried about the Securitate behind the door, but I think that on the whole, people's dispositions became more free. Is there anything else you think of that you'd want me to say about that?
No, I would just want to, I can't wait to get to the very hot topic, which is the Securitate file, which makes the object, because you have spent a lot of time in secret police's archives, and two books resulted from this work. But of course, the most spectacular is my life as a spy, which, like all your books, has an amazing title, coming from a big name in anthropology, of course, the Grand Green of anthropological studies. But it's when you enter the archives, you were amazed to see that your file was huge, almost 3,000 pages.
Yes.
Of course, other people had big files, but from any measure, this is a big file. Why was it so big? Why so many pages for an American anthropologist doing field work in Maramureș, in other parts of Transylvania?
Well, I was there at a number of fairly difficult times. And so, especially in the 1980s, it was really pretty tightly tied down, Romania was. And so they were concerned about the image of Romania in the West in particular. So that was one thing they were always looking for in my field notes, for example, which they got and read and made comments in the margins of. So I would find the note that I had written, and then out in the margin in ink, yes. So obviously they thought I was right on the money. But there were a number of Americans who did field work during that time. I was one of the first, but certainly not the only one. And it was tough for the Romanian authorities to know what to do with us, because officially we were part of an exchange program that had good beneficial results for Romania, I don't know what they all were, but the Romanians who came to the U.S. got some very good training in high technology, computers, things of that kind, as well as in regular subjects. So let me see, what else did you ask?
About how did you find these 3,000 pages? You know,
yes, how did I find
how
it?
shocking was to see that you have a huge file and people were following you, you know, step by step. It's an amazing what you found in this file. Tell us a little bit about this experience of finding this file and what was in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Virgiliu Țărău, professor at Cluj, who was one of the vice presidents of the CNSAS for a good while.
This is a body that studies the Securitate, that is keeping the files or the archives just for the American audience.
Right.
Sorry for it.
And I would go there for 2-3 weeks almost every summer to see what else I could find in my file. They Xeroxed the whole thing for me and I took that home, but I found that I had a lot of trouble getting it to open it because I was kind of afraid of what I'd see there. But Virgiliu suggested to me that one of the problems we had was that at that time the Romanian government was very concerned about the image of Romania in the world. And so if anything silly or untoward or whatever came into the public gaze, then it was something that I or other Romanian studiers could do, could make comments about that would be unfavorable. And so basically it started, this secret police following started from wanting to know, what were we looking at? Were we something they should be afraid of? And then once they'd started to build up a nice body of evidence, some of them decided that we were up to no good. But in my case, I brought some of it upon myself by things that I put in my first book that looked like an insult to Romanians. That wasn't what I intended. But let me see, remind me of your question now. I just
it was the interesting thing. It was not only that they found that you put something in the book that was considered offensive or dangerous, but the fact that somehow they believed that you they wouldn't have none of it, that you were an anthropologist, because everything you did for them seemed to to reveal a very skillful, deft a CIA operative. What was in the work of the anthropologist and the work of the intelligence operative that was so, that was so striking? How could they believe that you were? That's why the file was so thick, because they said, no, we have a very dangerous enemy now. This lady is very, very shrewd. What was the point of that?
Well, they had their idea of what an intelligence officer does. And so they would see me doing some things that could easily be understood as collecting intelligence. And then that would get them very upset and nervous. They would be concerned with whom I was meeting. And so for one day, for example, I was walking down the street in Cluj, going to the History Institute, and a professor that I had met earlier but didn't have any particular relationship to came up and shouted in my face, "Securiste!" And why was I telling the Securitate all about these people. And I said, excuse me, to my knowledge, I've never met one. But people were concerned just about just exactly everybody else was doing in this period, when you didn't really know who you'd been dealing with before, but you did know that there was a possibility that you were now dealing with somebody quite different who might be dangerous. So the interest in my spying had to do with that, and with the fact that I seemed to have a knack for getting myself into trouble one way or another. Riding my motorbike into a military base was the first one.
That's where it started, right? Because inadvertently you just passed by a military base or something like that,
Yeah, I was stopped by a policeman who asked, because I had red license plates, which are what the
diplomatic license plates. Yeah.
Right. So I was in my conversations with a few secret police people that I met while I was working on that book. They basically said, well, a lot of people came to Romania to try to do something to hurt the socialist system one way or another. And we had to be sure that you weren't one of them. So we followed you. It was like perfectly natural. And there were a few notes in my file that with little writings up at the top of the file by a senior officer saying things like, you have to be really careful with her. She's very skillful. And I didn't have a clue what a spy did, but they did. They saw it all the time. So those kinds of things were part of that history.
And also tell us a little bit about your life with the Romanian families, because as by training, the methods, the anthropological method was to live with your subjects, to live in that particular environment, and to learn, to listen to. And you have a very, very funny story when you, as the Stanford PhD student, coming in the field for the first time, and just somebody and your host, you were living in a village in Maramureș. Your hosts were talking about themselves.
It was.
Or in Hunedoara was this one. And the hosts were talking about some specific thing, and then you intervened and clarified all this, like something you wouldn't do as an anthropologist. Could you tell us this? It's a funny story. It's something of important lessons that you learned very early on in your professional.
I came to Romania from graduate school, where I had been the top student in my class, and I'd gotten the best money package for...
You remained the top student in your class.
Pardon?
You are still the top student in your class.
Yes, but I had a pretty good opinion of myself. And I was very certain that American anthropology was better than the anthropologies available in East European countries. I knew something about them. And I was pretty full of myself. So I think I have an anecdote in the book about going to visit one of my friends one day in the winter, and she's lying on her bed, and her sister-in-law is putting ventuzele on her back. And so I'm looking at this, I've never seen anything like it. And the woman, she holds up a little cup, she dips a stick into a glass of alcohol, passes it through a flame, then runs it around the inside of the glass and snaps it onto the back of the person. And she's got about, 7 or 8 of these things in rows across the poor woman's back. And I'm saying practically, this is barbaric. So I'm, what are you doing? And so they explained the whole theory to me, but I was pretty convinced that that was just not the right thing. Why don't you take an aspirin? Why don't you go to the doctor and so on. So it took me a while to stop being really sure that I already knew everything about Romania and that I knew what it meant. And I was just lucky that the people that I spent time with were patient. And I was also funny. I mean, I could be a good companion. I wasn't just always being extremely snooty. But it did take me a while to strike a balance with people in terms of what kinds of things I was learning about them and how I was learning to do my ethnography differently, which was at least as important as any of the facts I learned. And they were really helpful to me in that way. The families, especially in the village where I lived, out of Laiku, I was introduced right at the beginning to a wonderful woman named Maria, of course, and it was being proposed that I would stay with her in Vlaicu, and she started off putting me up, but then it turned out that her husband worked in Kujir, this armaments factory, and that he actually didn't have permission as a party member to have me staying in his house in this kind of arrangement. So shortly thereafter, I moved to another house. And even that was itself something to learn from, because they actually didn't know how to tell me why I wasn't allowed to be in his house, but I certainly went there a whole lot and talked to his wife day after day. But anyway, there are little things like that that anthropologists cut their teeth on, and lots of realizing that what you've just said is stupid, and that the truth to something lies completely, elsewhere, and you thought you were really clever at figuring out a completely bogus response. So that I found field work extremely hard. It was challenging for all these reasons, but it was also really funny. And people would set down the glass of Zuika when I arrived. My whole evening would be spent trying not to drink so much that I couldn't talk. So there were things like that. But the people that I spent a lot of time with taught me a huge amount, and they were incredibly generous and just kind of taking me on.
There's a touching moment in one of the Doctor Honoris Causa ceremonies where you thank all people, Romanian people who helped you in your research and in your Romanian life, and also among the big names in Romanian academia and members of Romanian Academy or rectors. There are a lot of names of these ordinary Romanians who have been your host or your friends, who help you understand the country like few others in outside Romania. Going back to the Securitate file, 3,000 pages. That's a lot of writing, and there are notes about you, about your life, about what you said, what you believed, what other believed you believed or said. What is the persona of Katherine Verdery that is emerging from this file? How would you describe it? It's obviously not you, but it's a portrait made of notes, made of Securitate officers, made of so-called friends who wrote about you or gave notes to the Securitate. What is the portrait of Katherine Verdery, like the picture in the carpet emerging from the front?
Yeah. It's a little hard to answer that question because there are many different kinds of voices in the police file. And one of them is the voice of me writing my field notes and what I have to say about something that I've been interested in. And another one is the voice of professors that I interacted with in the university and other university personnel. And for the most part, they seem to have been trying to protect me, most of them, in the sense of just saying, oh yeah, well, she's really good, she's smart, she's fun, we enjoy her, she's written a good paper, she's not doing anything she shouldn't. And so there's that kind of response. And then there are others who are absolutely convinced that I'm working against the interests of Romania. So different kinds of people had different reasons for thinking these things of me and different takes on me. Yes, in the my lecture for the Cluj Doctor Honoris Causa, I thanked a number of people, including the professor who first introduced me to the field and how he did that. That was Mihai Pop, now deceased. So I think I have been appropriately grateful and acknowledged that because I certainly learned nothing about doing field work in my graduate program at Stanford. It was terrible.
Do you think that that long association with Romania in such an intimate way, such a profound way, did this long association, do you feel, did it change you, if at all, in any way, if at all?
Well, I definitely think I became a better researcher. That's one of the points in this lecture we mentioned. I became more aware of the parts of my own personality that responded to this sort of people's, but there's a Romanian expression, I now forget it, that you do what you can to get around, that you succeed by cleverness. And I never thought of myself, right, I never thought of myself as all that clever, but I began having some experiences that made me realize that I was learning some techniques. So for example, my partner at the time came to visit me while I was in the field, and we went back to Bucharest, and he said he wanted to have, to go to a concert or an opera or something. I wanted to see what Romanians were putting out. So I asked the secretary of the Folklore Institute where I was based if there were any way she could get me 2 tickets. And she tried, but she called back and said this was only for that night, you know, there was no time. And so I figured I would just do it myself. And I got dressed up in a really nice dress, and my partner got very nicely dressed up. He was very tall, so, you know, people saw him as a person of substance. And we showed up at the opera, and I walked to the desk or asked to speak to the director or something, and I said I was accompanying this very eminent professor from Stanford University, and
that's a very Romanian way to do it.
Right, and we were wondering if there were any way we could get a ticket. And it took about 5 minutes for me to be placed with my partner in really good seats. But I would never have thought to do that, to, you know, present myself, first of all, in a role that was not actually mine, and secondly, to carry it off so that we continued to look like foreign people who were enjoying the opera, you know, instead of 2 thieves or 2 clever people or whatever. So things like experiencing some aspects of my personality that had not really had a lot of room before. That's, I think, more along the lines of what sorts of benefits I took away from living there. And it was also very wonderful to do the field work and learn a lot of things about Romania, as well as learning about myself in Romania, which was what I was talking about. And I definitely felt that overall, I became a somewhat different person. I don't know if the people I knew there would agree with that, but the ones who liked me at the beginning still like me at the end. So that's helpful.
And I should say you are liked by many people. You have a lot of disciples in Romania, and as we were chatting before the show, before the program, you have quite a fan base in Romania, and for the right reasons. There was the 80s were a very difficult time in Romania. Of course, the 70s were different, but the 80s, a country under a huge strain, isolated, cold, dark, and also increasingly repressive. Until 1989, of course, when with the revolution, everything changed. But living in Romania in the 80s for months at a time, you came across what I would call the evil, pure evil. Not we can call it in many ways. We can describe it. It was really moral evil. It was sometimes even physical evil. What was how would you describe this experience of evil as a Westerner, not as an anthropology professor, as an anthropology author, ethnographer, but as a Westerner experiencing, something that is radically different for what you as an American, as a Westerner, were used to by growing up, by acting as an American citizen, voting, having something to eat. And all these things just didn't happen, just didn't exist for you. What did you feel at the time, and how would you look back to that experience?
Well, it's interesting, but I tend not to think in terms of evil. Though if I got mad, I could say somebody was an evil, horrible person. But anthropologists are supposed to do their best, although I didn't do it so well sometimes, to figure out what are the circumstances that are producing a particular behavior. What are the circumstances that certain values develop in, rather than, is this person evil, or is this an exemplification of evil? Or
the world is evil, right?
Yes, right. Well, I certainly thought Ceaușescu was pretty evil, because I thought that the really terrible times people were having in the 1980s could easily be changed by him. So what else would I say instead? I think I was having a conversation with Professor Keith Hitchens once, who's another Romanophile.
The great historian.
And he said that, this was in the 80s, he said he found that this experience of being there in the 80s was increasing his respect for Romanians, because they were managing to continue to be relatively good humored, to tell terrific jokes, to sit and drink suika, far into the night. And here they were in this situation that both of us knew quite well by that time was quite unpleasant.
Yeah.
And still they could be making haz de necaz.
Yeah.
And I would say in the US, that's not such a strength. People tend to get, if they get into a bad situation, they tend to get angry about it rather than figuring out some way to turn it into, something amusing or enjoyable. And I definitely agreed with him. I left Romania at the end of 1985 with tremendous respect for how people were managing to carry on their lives in this awful situation. Ceaușescu for 2 hours on TV and then lights out. It was hard for me to do my work. So that's kind of how I would talk about this rather than evil. Hitler, yes, Hitler was evil, but I hope you understand what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
If you want to argue with me.
No. It's you know, the anthropologist. You know, it's a perfect anthropological answer, or the answer of a great anthropologist. Talking about your Romanian experience. Of course, in your file you saw that, and it happened to all those who wrote about their files, and there have been some quite interesting books about Romanian authors, academics writing about a book about their files. Mm-hmm. And there is always a topic there. There is always a theme. In one finding that some of the people who that person was close to was in fact an informant, mm-hmm. Was somebody who betrayed their friendship, betrayed mm-hmm. their relationship. Did you find people like that in your file, or you just found names that you somehow expected that they were mm-hmm. those who wrote the notes? And if yes, what did you feel?
Yeah. In general, I enjoyed the confidence of a couple of my friends who were put in this position, and they were put in it, of course, because I enjoyed their confidence. But one of them told me before the end of the regime that she had been asked to file reports on me and roughly what their substance was, and that she was very sorry about this, but that, you know, she just didn't feel she had any choice. So there were other people like that, but she was the most noticeable to me at the beginning because nobody else had done that. This was 1987, and she's telling me this. So now where were we? So there were others who also said, well, after you left, we had another visitor, or, you know, things like that, indicating that they were communicating something to me and that I would acknowledge it. But there were people who gave reports and whom I didn't expect to be giving reports, or I didn't expect the kind of report that was given.
Yeah. The language or
either very sad or very angry, and hadn't told me about it beforehand. So I was depressed, as I say in the book. I was depressed for months while I was working on this book, especially at the beginning, because I just kept thinking, you know, how do you know? How do you know what you're dealing with? How do you know who your friends are? That's a problem for them as well as for me. But this experience of terrible uncertainty and untrusting responses to people that I had known before without asking those kinds of questions. And so one of the really good things about doing field work in that context is checking out some of these things with other people in Romania. And I'm thinking specifically of my landlord at one point. I had a number of landlords, but this one in particular showed up in my file with a whole lot of reports on what I was doing in the village. And at first I was just shocked because he had the names of people and the topics that I discussed with them, and occasionally a little editorializing by him and so on. Now the guy had just died when I got this, and so I didn't feel that I could go and complain about it, but it took me quite a long time to figure out how to keep living with my image of him. Some of my Romanian friends said that they too went through this period of a process of trying to excuse their friends' dereliction in a way. with the landlord, I asked his wife, so did you know that he was talking with the police? And she said, oh, of course. He always said you were nice, but he just, he had to do that. And so he did it. He liked to eat and drink, and they would take him up to the restaurant and, ply him with good food and wine. And so I tried to let these people help me to come to a similar sort of relation to the people that I was most worried about. And if there were a few that I felt particularly bad about, there was one particular person that I was so mad. I just wanted to go and visit her and shake her. But I got back at her because I told a nasty story about her in my book. so every now and then I thought I'd have a chance
to take revenge,
yeah.
The tries. But I mean, it's important to note that you're, like always, in your books, your gaze is very nuanced, and the way you explain all these the people were forced, or all this mechanism of terror of putting somebody in the position to file reports on somebody else is very, very subtly explained and thoroughly. And because you're obviously a great name in American academia, I'm curious to know what you feel about, because in Romania I saw a big conversation about Marxism returning to the triumphally in the academia, and some of the departments being taken over by neo-Marxist ideas. Do you think this is the case? And also, do you think that we can still talk about Marxism after we have seen some of the devastations of an ideology that was as powerful as the national ideology?
Well, that's a big question.
I save it for last. Save the best for last.
I'm not sure that I would say that Marxism has reappeared in Romania. What I would say is that
in the US,
well, it doesn't have much of a place except in universities, I think, and in academic life. And in that context, what's valuable about Marx, and I'm one of his great admirers, was the extraordinary complexity with which he thought about human societies and about the interconnections among economic behavior and religious behavior and political behavior and so on. He just had an extraordinary ability to see the connections among everything. And so I never talked about Marx or Marxism much when I was in Romania, but I actually became much more interested in Marx from being there than I had been before I went. And it's quite possible that with all of the upheaval that's going on these days, Marxism, ideas of Marx may be reworked into new approaches to settling conflict. I'm thinking specifically about the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States now that has resulted, it has achieved, it already had some visibility, but it has achieved suddenly a tremendous visibility, and rightly so, in my opinion. So thinking about how political values might be modified so as to get rid of some of the terrible way in which certain white people treat most Black people here, Marx may have something to contribute to that. And so that's, as I say, I wouldn't use Marxism, but the ideas of Marx, the way he thought. I had a colleague at CUNY before I retired named David Harvey, who's a famous Marx specialist in geography. And he felt he was about to start teaching Capital again because he said, he used to teach it year after year. He said, maybe that we can get something out of this that will help us through the troubles that we're entering into. And I'm not going to say no. I think we need all the help we can get.
Yeah. I wouldn't find answers in that particular book, but that's that's only me. I think we are up to our time. It's been a wonderful conversation. Again, we are very thankful for having accepted our invitation to participate in this very last episode of the spring season of the Leon Feraru conference series. Just to let everybody know that the series will continue in the fall with hopefully another excellent lineup and diverse lineup, the same we have had during these almost 3 months. We are very grateful to all our viewers, and we have seen a tremendous response to these conversations, and a lot of comments and words of praise and or questions. So we are thankful to all those who have watched this program in the past weeks and months. Apparently, the fight against the pandemic continues. It's not over. So we will be still online for the foreseeable future. So it means our program is expanding, is growing. We will have some of our permanent series extended. Other new surprises will be broadcast in the following weeks and in the fall. So check out our rciusa.info website for more information on all other platforms. Professor Verdery, again, thank you very much for spending this 1 hour in the afternoon with us. I know it's a very sunny place where you are, and you are eager to take a walk. But thank you for this.
And I'm very, very honored that you wanted to include me in the lineup here. So aside from the fact that I always enjoy talking with you, this whole thing was a pleasure.
It's all the pleasure is all ours. See you again at the Leon Feraru conference series in the fall. Let's not forget that everything we do at the Romanian Cultural Institute during these times is dedicated to the wonderful medical personnel and essential workers, especially Romanian American and Romanian Canadian, who put their lives on the line so that we keep safe. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.
Goodbye.